You know those moments when someone's entire life changes in an instant, when years of hidden hatred finally explode and destroy everything? Well, what you're about to hear is the story of how one off-duty cop's racist attack became the worst decision of his pathetic life. And when he found out who he had just assaulted, his whole world didn't just crumble, it completely imploded. This is what happens when a racist with a badge meets real power. It was a Friday evening at Chez Laurent, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the state capital. The kind of place where senators dined with lobbyists, where million-dollar deals were sealed over wine that cost more than most people's rent. The soft jazz, dim lighting, and hushed conversations created an atmosphere of refined elegance that attracted the city's most powerful players. Robert Williams, a distinguished-looking black man in his early 50s, sat alone at a corner table, reviewing legal documents while waiting for his dinner. He was dressed impeccably in a charcoal gray suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, his gold cufflinks catching the candlelight as he made notes in the margins of what appeared to be a complex legal brief. To anyone observing, he looked exactly like what he was, a successful, powerful man enjoying a quiet dinner after a long day. At the bar, Officer Kyle Jackson was already 3 whiskeys deep into what was supposed to be a celebration of his 20th year on the force. Off-duty and in civilian clothes, the 45-year-old cop was loud, obnoxious, and getting drunker by the minute. His buddies from the force had already left, sensing trouble brewing, but Jackson stayed, convinced he owned every room he walked into. Jackson had spent 2 decades believing he was the thin blue line protecting society from thugs and criminals, words he used liberally when he thought he was in safe company. His Facebook page, which he thought was private, was full of Blue Lives Matter posts mixed with barely veiled racist memes about urban crime and those people. Tonight, the alcohol had stripped away what little filter he usually maintained in public. When Jackson spotted Robert Williams sitting alone, his drunk brain immediately went to its default setting: suspicion and contempt. Here was a black man in an expensive restaurant wearing an expensive suit, looking like he belonged. In Jackson's twisted worldview, this didn't compute. This man had to be a drug dealer, a rapper, maybe an athlete, but certainly not someone who had earned his place through legitimate means. "Hey," Jackson slurred loudly, stumbling over to Robert's table. "You lost or something? The hip-hop club is down the street." Robert looked up from his documents, immediately assessing the situation. 25 years in law had taught him to read people quickly, and what he saw was a drunk racist looking for trouble. He remained calm, his voice steady and controlled. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, having dinner. I'd appreciate it if you'd let me eat in peace." But Jackson wasn't done. The alcohol and his inherent racism had created a toxic cocktail of aggression. "You dealing drugs to afford this place? What's your game, homie?" He deliberately emphasized the last word, his tone dripping with contempt. Other diners began to notice the confrontation. Several pulled out their phones, sensing something was about to happen. The restaurant manager, Henri Dubois, started making his way over, but he wasn't moving fast enough. Robert closed his folder calmly. "Sir, you're drunk, and you're embarrassing yourself. Please go back to the bar and leave me alone." That's when Jackson saw the legal documents on the table, the official state seal visible on one of the pages. His drunk mind jumped to another conclusion. "Oh, what are you, some kind of lawyer? Probably one of those public defenders getting criminals back on the street. Is that it? You help thugs beat the system?" "I work in law enforcement," Robert said evenly, hoping that might diffuse the situation. He didn't want to reveal his true position yet, knowing that embarrassing a drunk cop in public could escalate things dangerously. Jackson laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Law enforcement? What are you, a bail bondsman, a meter maid? Don't make me laugh." The manager finally arrived. "Gentlemen, is there a problem here?" "Yeah, there's a problem," Jackson said, his voice getting louder. "I want to know why you're letting drug dealers eat in your restaurant. This place used to have standards." Henri, who knew exactly who Robert Williams was, the state attorney general who dined there twice a week, went pale. "Sir, I need you to leave immediately. You're disturbing our guests." "I'm not going anywhere," Jackson declared, puffing out his chest. "I'm a cop, 20 years on the force. I know a criminal when I see one." Robert stood up slowly, his 6'2" frame towering over Jackson. "You're a police officer?" he asked, his voice taking on a different tone, one that anyone who worked in the state justice system would recognize as dangerous. "Damn right I am," Jackson boasted, pulling out his badge and waving it around. "Officer Kyle Jackson, District 12, and I'm telling you, I know your type. You might have fooled these people with your fancy suit, but you don't fool me." Robert pulled out his phone. "Officer Jackson, I'm going to give you one last chance to walk away. You're drunk, you're off duty, and you're making a serious mistake." Jackson interpreted this as a threat. In his intoxicated state, he saw Robert reaching for his phone as an act of aggression. "Put the phone down," he shouted, lunging forward and grabbing Robert's wrist. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media, news outlets, and eventually in courtrooms. Jackson tried to wrestle the phone away, and when Robert resisted, Jackson threw a wild punch that connected with Robert's jaw. The state attorney general stumbled backward, his lip split and bleeding. "Stop recording!" Jackson shouted at the other diners, but it was too late. Multiple angles captured him attacking Robert, who was clearly trying to defend himself without escalating the violence. "You're assaulting me," Robert said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm not resisting. This is assault." Jackson, lost in his racist rage and alcohol-fueled aggression, grabbed Robert by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "You think you're better than me? You think you can come into our spaces and act like you own the place?" That is when Robert decided enough was enough. "My name is Robert Williams," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "I'm the state attorney general, and you just ended your career." The words hit Jackson like a bucket of ice water. His grip loosened, his face going from red to white in seconds. "You're what?" "The state attorney general," Robert repeated, straightening his jacket. "The chief law enforcement officer of this state. Your boss's boss's boss, and you just assaulted me while identifying yourself as a police officer." Jackson's legs nearly gave out. He stumbled backward, his brain trying to process what he'd just done through the fog of alcohol. The state attorney general, the man who had the power to prosecute any crime in the state, the man who worked directly with the FBI on civil rights violations, the man who had just announced a major initiative to root out corruption and racism in law enforcement. I didn't know," Jackson stammered, the weight of his actions beginning to crush him. "Of course you didn't," Robert said, dabbing at his bleeding lip with a napkin. "You saw a black man and assumed I was a criminal. You didn't see the state attorney general, or a lawyer, or even just a citizen enjoying dinner. You saw my skin color and made your judgment." The restaurant had gone completely silent except for the sound of phones recording. Everyone understood they were witnessing something historic, the moment a racist cop's career and life came crashing down in real time. Robert turned to the manager. "Henri, please call 911. I want Officer Jackson arrested for assault. Make sure they send a supervisor." Then he addressed the room. "I'll need contact information from anyone who recorded this. You've just witnessed a law enforcement officer assault the state attorney general because of racial prejudice." Jackson tried one last desperate play. "Look, I've been drinking. I didn't mean it." Can we just forget this happened?" Robert's expression was ice cold. "Forget it?" "Officer Jackson, you've just demonstrated exactly why I took this job, to remove officers like you from positions of power. You've validated every complaint, every concern, every fear that black citizens have about racist cops. No, we won't forget this. This is just the beginning." As sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer, Jackson realized that everything he had built over 20 years, his career, his pension, his identity as a cop, had just been destroyed by his own hatred. And the man he had attacked, the man he had assumed was beneath him, was about to become his worst nightmare. The other diners watched as Jackson slumped into a chair, his face a mask of shock and dawning horror. Several were already posting their videos online with captions like, "Racist cop attacks State Attorney General," and "You won't believe what this drunk officer just did." Can you imagine being the responding officers who had to arrest their own colleague for attacking the State Attorney General? The look on their faces when they walked into that restaurant was priceless. But what happened next? The complete dismantling of Officer Jackson's entire existence was even more satisfying. This is where karma doesn't just knock on your door, it kicks it down and takes everything. The first responders to arrive were Officers Chen and Martinez from Jackson's own precinct. They walked in expecting a routine disturbance call, but what they found made them stop dead in their tracks. Their colleague, Kyle Jackson, sitting slumped in a chair, reeking of whiskey, while the State Attorney General stood nearby with a split lip and blood on his expensive shirt. "Attorney General Williams," Officer Chen said, her voice professional but clearly shaken. "Are you injured, sir? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm fine, Officer Chen," Robert replied, recognizing her from a recent community policing initiative. "But I need Officer Jackson arrested for assault and battery, drunk and disorderly conduct, and violation of civil rights under color of law." Jackson looked up at his colleagues desperately. "Chen, Martinez, come on. You know me. This is all a misunderstanding." Martinez, a 15-year veteran who had always been uncomfortable with Jackson's racist comments but never spoke up, shook his head. "Kyle, you attacked the State Attorney General. There's no misunderstanding here." He pulled out his handcuffs. "Kyle Jackson, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent." As Jackson was being cuffed, his hands behind his back just like he'd done to so many others, Robert was already on the phone with his office. "Diana, I need you to wake up everyone. Yes, everyone. We have a situation. An off-duty officer just assaulted me at Chez Laurent. Racial motivation, multiple witnesses, everything on video. I want a full investigation team here within the hour." The videos were already going viral. Ag-assault was trending within minutes. The footage was damning. Jackson's racist comments, his unprovoked attack, the moment of recognition when he realized who Robert was. News vans started arriving before Jackson was even put in the patrol car. Police Chief Margaret Thompson arrived at the scene personally, something that only happened for the most serious incidents. She looked at Jackson with a mixture of disgust and disappointment. 20 years, Kyle. 20 years you've been on the force, and this is how it ends? Chief, I can explain, Jackson started. Save it for internal affairs, Chief Thompson cut him off. She turned to Robert. Attorney General Williams, on behalf of the entire department, I am deeply sorry. This is not who we are. Robert's response was measured but firm. With all due respect, Chief Thompson, this is exactly who you are until you prove otherwise. Officer Jackson felt comfortable enough to attack a black man in a room full of witnesses. That doesn't happen in isolation. That happens in a culture that enables it. The chief couldn't argue because she knew he was right. There had been complaints about Jackson for years. excessive force against black suspects, racist comments, problematic social media posts. But nothing had ever been done beyond a slap on the wrist and retraining. As Jackson was driven to the station for booking, his phone, which had been confiscated as evidence, was buzzing nonstop. His wife was calling, having seen the videos online. His adult children were texting, horrified by what they were seeing on social media. His brother, also a cop in another state, sent a message that just said, "What have you done?" At the station, Jackson was processed like any other criminal. Fingerprinted, photographed, stripped of his belongings. The booking photo, showing him disheveled, drunk, and defeated, would become one of the most shared images on the internet that week. The headline, "From Badge to Booking," appeared on every major news site. Meanwhile, Robert's team had descended on the restaurant like a well-oiled machine. Assistant attorneys general, investigators, civil rights specialists, all gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, documenting everything. They weren't just building a case against Jackson, they were building a case against systemic racism in the police force. Diana Huang, Robert's chief of staff, had pulled Jackson's entire record within hours. What she found was a goldmine of misconduct that had been covered up for 2 decades. "Robert, you need to see this," she said, showing him the file. 32 excessive force complaints, all against black or Hispanic citizens. 28 of them were dismissed without proper investigation. The 4 that were sustained resulted in nothing more than written warnings. Robert's jaw tightened. "Get me everything, every complaint, every report, every single thing Jackson has ever written or done in 20 years, and I want to know who covered for him." The investigation quickly expanded beyond Jackson. His social media accounts, which he thought were private, revealed a network of racist officers sharing memes, celebrating violent arrests of minorities, and referring to black neighborhoods as the jungle and enemy territory. Jackson was the most active member, with over 1,000 posts that ranged from subtly racist to explicitly white supremacist. By morning, Jackson's bail hearing had become a media circus. Every major news outlet in the country had sent reporters. The courtroom was packed, with civil rights leaders, community activists, and citizens who had been victims of Jackson's racism over the years. Jackson's lawyer, a public defender since no private attorney would touch the case, tried to argue for minimal bail. "Your Honor, Officer Jackson has been a member of this community for 20 years. He has ties here, a family, he's not a flight risk." Robert personally appeared to argue against bail. "Your Honor, Officer Jackson attacked the chief law enforcement officer of this state because of my race. He did so while identifying himself as a police officer, using his position to intimidate and assault. He is exactly the kind of person who poses a danger to the community, particularly to black citizens who have been his victims for 2 decades. The judge, an elderly black woman who had seen too many cases like this, set bail at $500,000. Jackson's face crumpled. He didn't have that kind of money. His house was mortgaged, his savings minimal. He would have to stay in jail until his family could figure something out. But that was just the beginning of Jackson's nightmare. Within 24 hours of the incident, Chief Thompson had suspended him without pay, pending termination. The police union, which usually defended officers no matter what, announced they would not be providing legal representation due to the egregious nature of the offense and clear video evidence. Jackson's wife, Linda, filed for divorce 3 days later. In her statement to the press, she said, "I've been married to Kyle for 18 years, and I've watched him become more hateful and bitter with each passing year. I ignored the signs, made excuses, told myself it was just the stress of the job. But seeing him attack an innocent man just because of his skin color, I can't be married to that person. My children can't have that man as their father." Their 2 kids, both in college, released a joint statement distancing themselves from their father. We were raised to believe in equality and justice. What we saw in that video was neither. That man is not the father we thought we knew. The criminal charges were just the appetizer. Robert announced that the state would be pursuing federal civil rights charges, which carried much stiffer penalties. Officer Jackson weaponized his position in law enforcement to terrorize black citizens. That's not just assault. That's a violation of the constitutional rights of every person he's targeted over his career. Then came the civil lawsuits. Robert personally filed a suit for $10 million. But more importantly, his office announced they would be helping every victim of Jackson's racism to file their own suits. Within a week, 43 people had come forward with stories of being profiled, beaten, or falsely arrested by Jackson. Marcus Thompson, a black engineer who Jackson had arrested 5 years earlier for suspicious behavior while waiting for an Uber in his own neighborhood, told reporters, "Jackson destroyed my life. I lost my job because of that arrest, even though charges were dropped. My kids were traumatized seeing their father in handcuffs. Now it's his turn to feel what we felt." The discovery phase of the lawsuits revealed even more damaging information. Jackson had planted evidence on at least 3 occasions, all involving black suspects. He had turned off his body camera dozens of times during arrests of minorities. He had a secret notebook where he kept a tally of what he called callers, arrests of black men that he treated like a scoring system. Jackson's former partners started coming forward, trying to distance themselves from him. Officer Patricia Rodriguez told investigators, "I reported Jackson's behavior 3 times to supervisors. Each time I was told to mind my own business, that Jackson was a good cop who just needed to blow off steam. The department enabled him for 20 years. This led to a broader investigation of the entire department. 7 supervisors who had covered for Jackson were suspended. The captain, who had dismissed the most complaints, was forced to retire. The entire department was placed under federal oversight." 3 months after the restaurant incident, Jackson's criminal trial began. He had aged 10 years in 3 months, his hair now completely gray, his face gaunt from stress and lack of sleep. He sat at the defendant's table in an ill-fitting suit, his lawyer beside him looking like she knew this was a lost cause. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They had the video from multiple angles, witness testimony, Jackson's own racist social media posts, and a pattern of behavior spanning 2 decades. Robert testified personally, describing not just the attack, but what it represented. "Officer Jackson didn't just assault me," Robert told the jury. "He assaulted the very idea of equal justice under law. He looked at me and saw not a human being, not a citizen, not even the Attorney General. He saw a target for his hatred. And if he felt comfortable doing that to me, imagine what he's done to people without my power and position." The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes. That's all the time it took to find Officer Kyle Jackson guilty on all counts. But the criminal conviction was just the beginning of his complete annihilation. What happened next was a masterclass in how justice, when properly served, can absolutely destroy someone who spent 20 years destroying others. When the foreman read guilty for assault, guilty for battery, guilty for civil rights violations, and guilty for hate crime enhancements, Jackson collapsed in his chair. His lawyer had to physically hold him up. The courtroom erupted in applause from the gallery filled with Jackson's victims and their families, people who had waited years to see him face consequences. Judge Patricia Washington, known for her tough sentences on corrupt cops, delivered her verdict with barely contained fury. "Officer Jackson, you took an oath to protect and serve all citizens. Instead, you used your badge as a weapon of racial terror. You attacked the state attorney general not despite his position, but because you couldn't accept that a black man could hold such power. Your actions represent the worst kind of corruption, the corruption of justice itself. She continued, I've reviewed your entire record, the complaints, the covered-up misconduct, the pattern of racial violence. You've been a cancer in the body of law enforcement for 20 years. Today, that cancer gets cut out. The sentence: 8 years in federal prison, no possibility of early release, followed by 5 years of probation. Jackson would also be permanently barred from any law enforcement position, lose his pension, and be registered as a hate crime offender. 8 years? Jackson gasped. For one punch? No, Judge Washington corrected. 8 years for 20 years of racial terrorism that ended with you attacking the chief law enforcement officer of this state. You're lucky I can't sentence you for all the crimes you got away with. As Jackson was led away in shackles, he passed Robert Williams in the hallway. You destroyed my life, Jackson spat. Robert looked at him calmly. No, Officer Jackson. You destroyed your own life the moment you decided your hatred was more important than your oath. I just made sure you faced consequences for it. But the criminal sentence was only the beginning. The civil lawsuits started rolling in like a tsunami. Robert's $10 million suit was joined by 43 other victims seeking damages. Jackson's assets were frozen. His house was seized, his retirement accounts liquidated. Even his prized truck and motorcycle were sold at auction to pay settlements. Linda Jackson, his ex-wife, gave a devastating interview to 60 Minutes. Kyle became more radical over the years. He'd come home from work and rant about those people ruining the city. He had secret meetings with other officers who shared his views. They called themselves the Brotherhood and talked about being warriors against the urban plague. I should have spoken up sooner. I'm ashamed I didn't. The investigation into the Brotherhood led to 15 more officers being arrested. Jackson, trying to reduce his sentence, turned informant and revealed everything. The planted evidence, the covered-up beatings, the coordinated harassment of black neighborhoods. His testimony led to over 200 convictions being overturned. In prison, Jackson discovered what happened to racist ex-cops. He needed protective custody just to survive, spending 23 hours a day in solitary confinement for his own safety. The general population had made it clear what would happen if they got their hands on him. Letters from inmates described in graphic detail what they wanted to do to the cop who had terrorized their communities. Meanwhile, Robert Williams used the incident to transform law enforcement statewide. He pushed through Jackson's Law, legislation requiring all police complaints to be investigated by independent review boards, mandatory body cameras that couldn't be turned off, and automatic federal review of any officer with more than 3 excessive force complaints. The new policies had immediate effects. Within 6 months, police brutality complaints dropped by 60%. Officers who had been part of Jackson's network either resigned or were fired. The culture of the department shifted dramatically, with younger, more diverse officers taking leadership positions. Jackson's children changed their last names to their mother's maiden name. His son, Kyle Jr., wrote an op-ed in the college newspaper titled, "My Father the Monster," that went viral. I grew up thinking my dad was a hero. Now I know he was the villain in countless families' stories. I'm in therapy dealing with the shame of sharing his DNA. His daughter, Sarah, became an activist for police reform. At a rally, she said, "My father's racism didn't just destroy strangers' lives, it destroyed our family. I lost my father to hate long before he went to prison. That man in the cell isn't my dad. He's a cautionary tale about what happens when prejudice goes unchecked." 3 years into his sentence, Jackson was stabbed in prison by another inmate whose brother had been one of Jackson's victims. He survived but lost the use of his left arm. The injury meant he could never return to physical work even after his release. His dreams of maybe becoming a security guard or bouncer after prison were gone. The financial destruction was complete. After all the lawsuits were settled, Jackson owed over $15 million in damages. The court ordered that any money he earned for the rest of his life would be garnished at 75%. He would never own property again, never have a bank account that wasn't monitored, never escape the financial consequences of his actions. 5 years into his sentence, Jackson's mother, his last supporter, died. He wasn't allowed to attend the funeral. His siblings banned him from any family gatherings, ashamed of the shame he had brought to their name. He was completely alone, abandoned by everyone who had once loved him. Robert Williams, meanwhile, became a national figure in criminal justice reform. He was appointed to a federal position overseeing police accountability nationwide. His memoir, Justice for All: How One Assault Changed American Policing, became a bestseller. He donated all proceeds to a fund for victims of police brutality. At a conference 5 years after the incident, Robert reflected on that night. Officer Jackson thought he was attacking just another black man he could intimidate and abuse. Instead, he attacked the very system of justice itself, and justice fought back. His story should serve as a warning to every officer who thinks their badge puts them above the law or above basic human decency. The restaurant, Chez Laurent, installed a plaque at the table where the incident occurred. It read, "At this table on March 15th, justice was served when State Attorney General Robert Williams stood up to racial hatred. Let this remind us that no one is above the law and everyone deserves to dine in peace." Jackson's legacy became a training tool at police academies nationwide. His case was studied as the Jackson incident. What happens when unchecked racism meets absolute accountability? Instructors would show the video and ask cadets, "Do you want to serve and protect, or do you want to end up like Jackson?" 7 years into his sentence, Jackson gave an interview from prison, his first and only. He looked broken, aged 30 years and 7, his eyes hollow. "I lost everything," he said. "My family, my career, my freedom, my future. All because I couldn't see past my hatred. I thought I was superior because of my skin color and my badge. Now I'm nothing. Less than nothing." When asked if he was sorry, Jackson paused for a long time. "I'm sorry I got caught," he finally said, then added, "No, that's not true anymore. I'm sorry for all of it, every person I hurt, every life I ruined, every child I terrified. But sorry doesn't undo 20 years of harm. Sorry doesn't give people their lives back." The interviewer asked one final question. "What would you say to Robert Williams if you could?" Jackson's voice cracked. "I'd say he was right, I was a cancer, and cutting me out might have saved the body. I spent 20 years thinking I was protecting society. Turns out, society needed protection from me." Upon his release after 8 years, Jackson emerged to a world that had moved on without him. No one would hire him. No one would rent to him. He ended up in a halfway house for ex-convicts, working minimum wage jobs when he could find them, most of his earnings going to his victims. He died alone 5 years after his release, a heart attack in his tiny apartment. His obituary in the local paper was 3 lines long. The comments section had to be disabled after thousands of his victims and their families shared their stories of how he had terrorized them. Robert Williams, upon hearing of Jackson's death, released a statement. "Kyle Jackson's life and death serve as a reminder that hatred destroys the hater most of all. He could have been a force for good, protecting and serving all citizens. Instead, he chose hate, and hate consumed him entirely. Let his story be a warning and a lesson. Justice may be delayed, but it will not be denied. The State Attorney General's office created the Jackson Memorial Fund, not to honor him, but to remember his victims and fund programs to prevent other officers from following his path. It raised $10 million in its first year, and that's how Officer Kyle Jackson went from a 20-year veteran cop to a broken, bankrupt, imprisoned pariah who died alone and unmourned. All because he couldn't stand to see a black man dining in peace at a nice restaurant. Sometimes karma doesn't whisper, sometimes it roars. And when you attack the State Attorney General because of your racism, karma doesn't just roar, it devours you completely.